What's up guys, also Footballtalk here. This is the final piece of my annual Divisional draft and roster review series. 8 videos, all 32 teams, one division at a time, as we've gone from north to west over the past month, switching back and forth between the NFC and AFC each week. As one more time, we'll discuss the draft classes of the Broncos, Chiefs, Raiders and Chargers today, and all the other acquisitions and departures from those rosters through that lens. You can check out all the other 7 divisions, but once more here, we'll go through every single player selected, discuss how they fit within those rosters, what the role may look like as we think about those depth charts, and give some overarching thoughts on each draft class. To close out the video, rather than doing draft grades, I'll stack the 4 draft classes up against one another, thinking about how much I believe it made sense with the general roster construction strategy. Usually this is the point where I say, even though there were 150 prospects who didn't even get drafted that I got eyes on, inevitably there are gonna be a couple names that I didn't get to, but thankfully for this video, as I looked through the names already, every single player I did evaluate. But let me quickly note here that I'm recording this about 10 days in advance, in case anything were to happen in the meantime that would be relevant for this discussion. One more time before we dive in, I'm gonna ask you to please hit the like button if you enjoyed the analysis, and maybe subscribe if you're interested in more from me. Basically every week I release either a video or article. Would love to have you along for the ride. The link to my site helloswithfootballtalk.com for all my content, and timestamps for the 4 teams discussed today are down below in the description. The final 4 teams now, starting with the Denver Broncos, who didn't own the original 30th and 94th picks due to the trade for wide receiver Jalen Waddle from the Miami Dolphins, along with moving down about 20 spots in the 4th round. And they delayed their start to this draft by another 4 slots in exchange for an early 6th rounder from Buffalo that they later used to jump up by about half a round in the 5th. When they did finally get on the clock, they brought in 3rd round 66th overall tight end Yedim, interior defensive lineman Texas A&M, a pair of 4th rounders, pick 108 Jonah Coleman, running back Washington, and 111 Cage Casey, the offensive tackle / interior offensive lineman from Boise State. In the 5th round, pick 152 Justin Joly, tight end NC State, and in the trio of 7th rounders, pick 246 Miles Scott, safety Illinois, 256 Dallin Bentley, tight end Utah, and 257 Red Murdoch, linebacker Buffalo. For Yedim at the top, this is a plus athlete at 6'4", 295 pounds, with over 34-inch arms, capable of lining up anywhere from a 2 to a 5 technique, with a quick slide step to establish himself in the gap from head-up alignments. It starts with a rapid arm over and creates TFLs as he backdoors zone blocking or flattens down the line against space blocks, and overall just brings that penetration element if you ask him to attack. His best move right now as a pass rusher is the club rip, where he hooks on the offensive lineman and is able to fight through contact as he corners his rush. But then you also see the flexibility to get his pads perfectly perpendicular to the line of scrimmage as he works crossface swim moves. In a slanting front, Yedim can get too focused on working around blocks and take himself out of his run fits to some degree, and often he'll defeat pass protectors off the line, but not swivel his hips around to actually stay on track for the quarterback, having to adapt a more cohesive rush plan overall in general. Not shocking that they'd be addressing the interior D-line here first, considering John Franklin Myers, based on finances, was by far the biggest departure from last year's team. Yedim profiles as a similar style of player, who can offer a disruption element, paired with some bigger, mostly pocket-pushing types that they have already. I'd expect him to come off the bench, but potentially rotating quite a bit early as a rookie already. Jonah Coleman, the Washington running back, is a rolling ball of butcher knives at 5'8", somewhere in the mid 220 pounds, who hits defenses with a bunch of body blows, with excellent front recognition and conceptual understanding to lead out runs with his feet mirrored to his eyes. He lacks the long speed to beat linebackers out to the sideline with regularity, on bounce opportunities, or pull away from long touchdowns, but he's so good at using shoulder fakes and subtle jabs to set up defenders in the open field, can unleash a mean stiff arm, and constantly churns out tough yardage, especially in short yardage and goal line situations. His usage as a receiver has been very simplistic so far, yet he only dropped 1 of 89 targets that he got his hands on throughout his college career, and he's a fundamentally sound pass protector who will square up blitzing linebackers with no fear and the lowest end of gravity to stall the momentum frequently. I know the Broncos brought back veteran J.K. Dobbins, who has been a productive player at 3 different spots when healthy now, but unfortunately he's a player you just know is gonna get banged up. So while Coleman should start as RB3 on the depth chart, if that injury strikes early on, I can see a path where the rookie leads the backfield in snaps and carries, because he offers more stability as an every down ball carrier and pass protector that RJ Harvey simply doesn't, even if he brings more dynamism to the table. Boise State offensive lineman Casey was a first-team All-Mountain West player these last 2 years and is 6'6", but reduces his height in and out of his stance pretty well in order to not lose leverage in the run game. He lacks any real pop in his hands and the ability to steer defenders towards the end of his reach in a capacity with a lot of body-on-body reps, but showcases impressive mobility to the second level and as a pull-out to the corner, with excellent body control on the move. His posture and pass pro is a little hunched over, and overall with him kind of walking backwards at this point, he's forced to overset against speed off the edge, which grants inside access too easily. Yet he's patient and balanced as he reads rushers with tremendous lateral agility and the wherewithal to not overreact to walkers are throwing at him as he tries to mirror them. So seeing him look much more comfortable inside when he's involved in closer combats and has those bumpers to either side of him during Senior Bowl week, it makes a lot of sense that he'd be a swing guard with very little behind the two starters, since the duo of Alex Forsyth as the backup center and a great athlete in Frank Crum coming along as a swing tackle who scored a touchdown in the playoffs, but may not be battling with KC for snaps when Denver goes to those 6 lineman sets. Justin Joly, the NC State tight end, although he was largely as an offset wingman, Joly actually logged more attached snaps than he did in the slot this past season after putting on over 20 pounds, and showcased his competitiveness in that area while keeping a flat back and wide base as a run blocker. Excels at stretching the seam and is quick to throw up a hand when he has a trailing defender stacked, to go for little stutters and shoulder fakes to keep him off balance, and he has massive 10.5-inch mids that just swallow the football, only dropping 1 of 50 targets that hit those last year, to go with the start-stop quickness to make tackles whiff after the catch. His hands start out too wide and he struggles to gain full control as a run blocker, and that's some exaggerated footwork and wasted movement, with Joly as a route runner as well, along with too many rounded breaks and drifts. Maybe not the type of joker we've so often talked about, as someone Sean Payton has been searching for, but hasn't really gotten with either last year's free agency signing Evan Ingram or second round pick RJ Harvey. Joly may not profile as an every down player, but as a package player to actually fit the description of the term, he could be a fun addition. Which makes it interesting that they went back to tight end with the second to last selection in the draft and Dallin Bentley from Utah, who also lined up a lot as a wingman at the hip of tackles and was tasked with sift or leap blocks, coming all the way across the formation a lot of times. Has good initial burst for leverage throws out to the flat, with a nice club swim move to elude contact early in the route, and does a good job of settling down in voided space as zone defenses disperse. Consistent in how he approaches the ball with soft hands, making natural adjustments with some impressive high punt grabs, as he didn't drop a single one of 40 passes last season, blocks more of his arms rather than he attaches those mids, and allows his lower body to do the work, and has room for improvement with how he boxes out and jumps back through contact for catches down the field, only securing 4 15 contested targets in 2025. The way I describe his scouting profile is imagining sliders on a creative player profile that are all set to about 60%, and then his hands are actually close to 100, so I think he can absolutely contribute as a tight end 3 this year. But now with Ingram and Adam Troutman as veterans, I'm wondering if they just carry all 4 guys in game day typically. But now let's move on to the other 2 7th rounders. First is safety Mal Scott, who was a walk-on wide receiver at Illinois, became a team captain, and really won me over when I got to his tape. Diagnoses the action, steps down from depth with square shoulders, and shows no hesitation meeting bigger running backs in the hole. Spent the majority of his snaps as a deep safety, where he showcased quality range, but things really clicked for him this past season with more purposeful movements, while having the agile feet and fluid hips to respond in man coverage, with excellent timing to attack the catch points, and only 3 penalties on over 2,400 career defensive snaps, or only as a 75.5-inch wingspan, and has to work overtime to keep his frame clean against blockers, and bigger pass catchers are able to post up and shield Scott from the football, which being flat-footed and catching tight ends especially doesn't help with in off-man coverage. PG Locke moved on in free agency. They did sign Tyson Anderson, who played a solid amount of snaps over his 3 active seasons with the Bengals, but even with their problems at safety, they didn't want to pay the $1.5 million Denver did, so I can see very much that Scott ends up as the number 3, even if they almost always want to put 3 corners on the field anyway. And this year's Mr. Irrelevant, Buffalo linebacker Red Murdoch, shows impressive short area burst and just a violent mindset as he attacks blockers, creating pile-ups and slipping off guys to wrap up the runner with a non-stop leg drive. Shows some pop in his hands to disrupt receivers and tight ends, trying to get through his area and zone coverage, but that's definitely where his issues show up, getting widened and allowing easy completions with replacement throws to go along with not being as comfortable tackling in space, and he doesn't quite have that silent to silent range to reach plays strung out wide, but he spots and charges through vacated rush lanes to create havoc for quarterbacks, and he has an incredible knack for punching the ball out at an angle, forcing 13 fumbles over the last 2 years combined, and breaking Khalil Mack's all-time record for his career as another former Bull. Even though they did bring back Alex Singleton, veteran Greg Greenlaw went back to San Francisco after a 1-year stint in Denver, and generally beyond the starting duo, you're looking at an undrafted free agent that I like quite a bit from last year, and nobody else really of note currently on the roster. So Murdoch could be very relevant if there's any injury. And to go with the guys they actually did select, I love one of the undrafted free agents, former Cal cornerback Brent Austin, who I wrote about a good week after the actual draft over at my site hellosforfootballtalk.com. As far as the guys they did pick, I thought Onyedim was definitely a bit early, but I see the potential he may have if asked to be more of a disruptive gap shooter compared to what he did at A&M with those flashes during Triangle Week. I love Coleman as a steady Eddie back who can lead a backfield in snaps if you pair him up with a more dynamic secondary guy like an RG Harvey long term. Casey and Scott offer much needed help at guard and safety respectively. Curious to see how they handle the talent situation, and maybe if they just flat out move on from Evan Ingram after a year. If they find someone who'll happily take on a substantial $14+ million cap hit this year. And Murdoch is a great Mr. Irrelevant, whose level of physicality and toughness very much embodied that type of player going at the end of the draft, when he actually snuck into my personal top 150. So I like what they did here quite a bit, outside of the first selection, but as we'll see here over the rest of the video, the AFC West did pretty well for itself overall. I'm sure Sean Payton will still be heavily involved in weekly game plans and setting up their playmakers, but Davis Webb now officially taking over play calling duties adds an interesting wrinkle as we think about how that unit comes together. Let's move on now to the team Denver snatched the division crown away from last year, the Kansas City Chiefs. They not only had 2 first-rounders this year, thanks to trading cornerback Trent McDuffie to the Rams, but they may never pick this high again as long as Patrick Mahomes is healthy, which he got hurt late last season after all those close games swung against their favor late previously. So to kick things off, 6th overall selected Mansour Lane, the cornerback out of LSU, 29th overall Peter Woods, interior defensive lineman Clemson, 2nd round 40th overall R. Mason Thomas, edge from Oklahoma, 4th round pick 109 Jaden Kennedy, the cornerback/safety from Oregon, a pair of 5th rounders, pick 161 Emmett Johnson, running back Nebraska, and 176 Cyrus Allen, wide receiver Cincinnati, and then in the 7th round, pick 249 Garrett Nussmeier, quarterback LSU. So to start things off, they moved up 3 spots, even from where they were originally slated to select, considering they did move on from the 2 starting corners, and probably viewed Mansour Lane as someone with a big gap to the rest of the class at that spot, sending a 3rd and 5th round pick to Cleveland in return. Let's talk about the player here first in the lane. Tremendous patience and balance to stay square to, attach to the hip pocket off, and stick to receivers like glue throughout the route. Excellent communication skills and feel for adjusting his landmarks in zone coverage, while being able to punish quarterbacks for trying to test them with throwing over his head. It also strikes through the hands of the intended target with great precision if he does turn his back to the ball. And he excels at leveraging the ball, swiping away to reach blockers, and taking away the sideline defending the run and screen game. He could do a better job of his route squeezing cover 3, too easily surrendering curls and deep in cuts after selling the vertical push. And he's vulnerable to allowing physical receivers to attack his chest and take charge of him in the run game, which combined with his tackling is where having sub 31-inch arms can show up occasionally. And even though I never loved shipping off a great veteran player to instead find a younger version of him, clearly KC needed some corner help after not only sending Trent McDuffie to the Rams, but also seeing LA send the other starter from last year and Jalen Watson as a free agent, to go with Joshua Williams moving on to Tennessee. The lane was by far the cleanest corner in this class, and he should immediately draw number 1 assignments, closer resembling to what this defense looked like a few years ago when they had L'Jarius Sneed on the outside. Next we have Peter Woods, the D-tackle from Clemson. Obviously this was the extra first rounder the Chiefs got back in a Trent McDuffie deal, along with getting the 5th and 6th rounder that they both traded away later, and the 3rd next year. Woods I was kind of out on personally, after completely falling off this past season for a Clemson program in decline, not doing anything in the pre-draft process other than a positional workout at its pro day, and coming in lighter to go along with only having 31.25-inch arms. Those shrink his margin for error and range as a tackler, to go with not being the most disciplined with his run fits, being fixated on working over the top of blocks, and not getting enough of those instant wins in passing situations, which he'll be more reliant on than others. I do of course acknowledge that he does show the power in his hands to reset the line of scrimmage at times, and his contact balance paired with the core strength to stay on his feet when caught in awkward positions is pretty rare. He shows an impressive ability to link his upper and lower half, to execute swim variations, to go with the wiggle to make pass protectors stop the feet momentarily, and his short area agility really stands out when involved in various stunts and games, as well as mirroring the movement of quarterbacks and erasing the escape angles from the pocket. Kansas City lost Charles Omenihu in free agency, and Mike Dana is also still in the open market as he's big at the ends, which I envision as the role that Woods may play as a rookie, similar to what he did in 2024, because you don't expose him to nearly as many combination blocks where things happen that quickly, as he may naturally be more of a sub 300 pound player, and then he slides inside on passing downs, almost flipping with Chris Jones, who does his most damage rushing over tackles these days. Since I really liked the value signing of former Patriot and previously Bear Khari Tonga at nose tackle, and I'm wondering if we could also see Spags adopt some odd form principles in general with the construction of that room now. Then in round 2, our Mason Thomas, the Oklahoma edge, who is only 6'2", 245 pounds with limited arm length that doesn't allow him to consistently play with vision through blocks and needs to be more alert for pin downs and crackbacks. And because he has that length disadvantage, tackles are often able to push him onto wider arcs without a true power element to turn things back in his favor. Yet for being undersized, he's a highly competitive run defender whose pad level and arm strength give him the advantage over tight ends routinely. I call him a specialized pass rusher with the way he gets off the ball, turns the corner and flattens at the top, displaying tremendous flexibility in his lower body to rush under the reach of pass protectors and turn tight corners, to go with natural hand counters, regularly winning through contact and drawing holding penalties. So with George Karlaftis being a productive, but more so slow burn pass rusher, and the 2023 first round pick Felix Enodike-Ozama just not establishing himself as part of the rotation or his first 2 seasons, before missing all of 2025 with a hamstring injury, they needed this type of guy for defined passing situations, who can quickly get home if he's playing over a slower footed tackle. Thomas may have like 8 sacks as a rookie, while playing less than 50% of snaps. They skipped the 3rd round as part of the trade-up for the lane as already outlined, but I really like the guy they targeted at top of day 3 in Jaden Kennedy, the DB from Oregon. Plants and drives forward in off-zone coverage to raise quick completions while understanding where the defense is vulnerable and denying easy access throws, and basically uses a push-pull technique as he's dealing with slot receivers in the run game to completely discard them and offer support, despite only being 180 pounds. Savvy receivers who beat the drums off the line can occasionally get Kennedy off balance and make him flip around, and when lining up more on the outside against some of these big ICC wideouts in 2024, Kennedy would end up going through the backs and drawing flags as the ball arrived there too often, in part because he only has 30-inch arms. But one of my favorite guys to watch in his past draft cycle. Feel free to read my full scouting report on him, or the few minutes I spent talking about him as part of the My Guys video I did about a month before the draft. Unlike what they used to do with McDuffie, where they'd flip him inside and out when he brought in the 3rd corner, this feels like a more defined plan, where Kennedy competes with Keita Kohu, who they brought in free agency, but I very much expect to win the primary job at nickel, to go with the lane and Noah Williams as a physical presence at the other perimeter job. Emmett Johnson from Nebraska is a gliding runner who can alter his tracks effortlessly thanks to great ankle flexion, but also hits sudden jump cuts and presents a small area for tackles to strike. Highly creative run in the open field with jukes, spins and sudden changes of direction, and he can stack those moves on top of one another in impressive fashion. To go with having caught 85 passes over the last 2 seasons combined, with clean routes and ball tracking skills. The 2 major problems with his profile: his 4.56 in the 40 was the slowest of any running back at this year's combine, and that's despite barely reaching over 200 pounds, which leads to him getting stopped in his tracks as a runner and blown through as a pass protector too often. Obviously, the Chiefs made a pretty big move in free agency to bring over reigning Super Bowl MVP Kenneth Walker from Seattle, after allowing Isaiah Pacheco to walk, and Kareem Hunt looking for an opportunity to maybe sign a veteran minimum deal somewhere still. Clearly they needed someone like Walker to add some explosiveness to the run and check down game with a player like that, but a late round pick from last year, Rashad Smith, is more of a fun scat bag, and Damari DeMarcado, the former Cardinal, also being more of an end of roster candidate. There was space to add another guy who can give him some stability. Johnson to me runs way bigger than the size would indicate, but also gives you a nice creation of individual yardage, particularly as a receiving option. He could carve out a meaningful role for himself behind a player like Walker, who has dealt with some bruises when ridden too hard. Cyrus Allen, the Cincinnati wide receiver, is a savvy route runner who understands when to purposefully tilt the wrong way in his route setups to provide himself more space out of the break, with fast feet off the line, and has no issues rolling for cuts. He eliminated early career drop concerns, only failing to secure one target that he got his hands on last season, and immediately pins the ball against his body, and then sharply pisses out the field after securing targets underneath to turn up positive yardage. Was basically a pure slot receiver in Mathai's best season, and is definitely quicker than fast, I would say, and he does present a limited catch radius without a real element of physicality after the catch. Another smaller receiver added to this wide receiver corps loaded up with them. Even though he's not reliant on speed, I think the value here is fine, even if I personally didn't like him nearly as much as some analysts like Daniel Jeremiah and Matt Harmon did, who have pretty strong track records in the space. I just finally wanted to see a little more size added to that room. But now let's finish up with Garrett Nussmeier from LSU, and I'd really encourage you to check out my full scouting report on him as part of my quarterback rankings, because I really liked him as more of a late second round pick and my clear QB3. Squeaky clean in his drops and overall mechanics, with great control of the football and excellent touch down the field. His field vision, processing ability, and anticipation are all NFL caliber, while consistently placing the ball to where his targets can maximize yardage after the catch. And then I thought his pocket presence was about as good as any quarterback in this admittedly underwhelming class, with a little Brock Purdy to him as he evades nearby rushers and extends plays. Unfortunately, he also has some Brock to him when he can get a little too aggressive as a decision maker, particularly outside the pocket, and he overestimates his slightly lesser speed than the 49ers starter. And he allows his base to get pretty wide, which hurts his accuracy, to go with predetermining some vertical shots. He should have gone way earlier based on his tape, but apparently there was some kind of medical concern where he had a cyst on his spine causing a nerve-related injury. The Chiefs actually traded a 2027 6th-round pick for Justin Fields from the Jets, but that was mostly based on only having a $3 million cap hit this year. They can bring him in for short yardage situations, with Mahomes never having run a sneak since he hurt his knee the first time, and maybe a few other design plays. But Nussmeier, when right, could legitimately be one of the best backups in the league, I believe at least, even if he obviously doesn't nearly have Pat's level of arm talent. And the Chiefs also put together kind of an all-star class of undrafted free agents, who I also wrote about in the piece on UDFAs that I pointed to earlier. Make sure to check that out if you're interested. For as much as I liked how a lot of the names they selected should fit in with what they want to do, the two positions I was surprised they didn't address at all. They released starting right tackle Jawan Taylor, who never lived up to his contract numbers, but now you're asking Jalen Moore, who he also handed some pretty good money to last offseason, to flip sides, compared to where he's been his best in college and the NFL. And Brian Cook quietly was a glue piece to the back end defensively, where you can label Jaden Kennedy as a safety, but sure you want to play him at nickel, where Trent McDuffie's most natural spot was previously. And now free agent Aloy Gilman, previously with the Ravens for half the season, and the Chargers before that, made me my most reliable true safety. Nonetheless, other than me generally being out on Peter Woods as a player I'd be willing to target in the first round, I thought they did pretty well here to address areas of need with quality players for where they picked them. They now have a starting trio of corners that they spend pretty good draft capital on, but financially give them significant relief, and overall this defense is more reminiscent of what they saw following the Tyreek Hill trade, with all these cheaper guys around Chris Jones who they brought in via the draft. No real difference makers on offense maybe, but long term could be really solid backup pieces, so thumbs up from me, even if I personally saw Woods quite differently, and I wouldn't say they got any major steals. Which brings us to the team that kicked off the draft, the Las Vegas Raiders, who first overall selected Fernando Mendoza, the quarterback from Indiana, second round for the 8th overall Traden Stukes, safety Arizona, a pair of third rounders, 67th overall Kieran Crawford, edge from Auburn, and 91st overall Dre Zoom III, interior offensive lineman Texas A&M, a pair of 4th rounders, pick 101 Jamal McCoy, cornerback Tennessee, and 122 Mike Washington Jr., running back from Arkansas, 2 5th rounders, pick 150 Dalton Johnson, the other safety from Arizona, and 175 Hezekiah Masses, cornerback Cal, the 6th round, pick 195 Malik Benson, wide receiver Oregon, and finally in the 7th round, pick 229 Brandon Cleveland, the interior defensive lineman from NC State. Again, feel free to check out my top actual quarterback rankings for a real in-depth breakdown, but summarized, Mendoza is a tall, old-school pocket passer who consistently delivers a tight spiral and can access all areas of the field without needing much space to step into throws. Clearly wants to release the ball as he gets to the top of his drop with anticipation, where he definitely showed an understanding for where defenses are vulnerable pre-snap, and consistently places the ball to where the position of corners would dictate, making a lot of money on these back shoulder balls to Elijah Surratt, stands tall in the face of pressure, willing to take some big shots to deliver down the field or to fight for key yardage as a runner, where he keeps both hands glued to the ball as he moves around, but then can eat up plenty of green grass if there's a lane open for him. The biggest takeaway as you think about his transition to the NFL are the insane amount of RPOs in the Indiana offense and how simplistic a lot of the reads were, and he's a little too panicky inside the pocket if something isn't there that he initially saw, and especially on broken plays, reverting to being a runner rather than becoming a creative playmaker out of structure. Of course, the departure of Kenny Pickett is pretty meaningless here, but Kirk Cousins being signed shortly before the actual draft does signal that the plan will be to start him early, with the veteran's familiarity in this type of system. Mendoza has virtually no experience working from under center, and so much of his production revolved around simplistic A-B reads in the RPO game, rather than what he'll be asked to do on those true dropbacks, and what new head coach Clint Kubiak wants to do in a heavy play-action game. Eventually, I believe his skill set will mesh very well with that, but there's simply a learning curve that makes me believe it'll be a month or so until the first overall pick is just undeniable and they push him out there. Trayton Stukes, the Arizona safety, is a feisty run defender who will attack the line of scrimmage and seek entry points to get involved in tackles with no fear when linemen are pulling out to the corner. Add these route combinations and positions himself very well between eligibles, with some tremendous moments of showcasing his range when he did rotate deep and could track the football. And he can match up with different body types, with nearly 32-inch arms and 4.33 speed, but it's his body control going through transitions that enables him to not lose phase. Too tall and a little restricted coming out of his paddle if asked to play extensive off-man or match coverage, and although he's become more reliable as a tackler, too often Stukes will leave his feet and try to sling his arms around the legs of ball carriers. Stukes has lined up pretty much everywhere in the secondary of Arizona, but will likely split time between a nickel and free safety in Las Vegas, because he has big time man-to-man ability, but also the range and ball skills to punish quarterbacks for errant throws. The Raiders signed veteran slot defender Teron Johnson this offseason, but he's seen recent decline, and maybe they actually are a candidate to reverse the trend of subbing the third safety or big nickel on for base downs, and rather drop Stukes down in defined passing situations, because you want to match him up against talented slot receivers. I'm intrigued by how new DC Rob Leonard truly unleashes him in the defense. Kieran Crawford from Auburn is just a demon on the edge, who constantly plays with his hair on fire, looking to punch and yank aside tight ends in the run game, and chases after the ball with a passion. Explodes off the ball as a pass rusher, who can soften either shoulder for himself, contort his body as he angles his path to the quarterback, and has improved his hand combats to stay on track. Plus, I was really impressed with him in coverage, watching him change directions, flip his hips, and muddy up those underneath passing lanes. He has room to improve his hand placement and general response to different blocking schemes in the run game, and he'd benefit from being more diligent with setting up and stacking rush moves on top of one another. Other than throwing $81 million, with 60 of those guaranteed over the next 3 years, and former Raven Tyler Linderbaum to completely reset the center market, the Raiders' second biggest free agency addition money-wise, with former Colts first-round pick Kwity Paye to pair up with Max Crosby on the edge. They also re-signed Malcolm Koonce as a quality third rusher, at the very least these past two off-seasons at $11 million respectively, so I'm guessing they may be ready to let him walk next year, and a Crosby trade closer to the deadline isn't off the table yet, because Crawford's talent indicates that he should be out there on the field earlier than the current setup would allow it. And since I just mentioned Linderbaum as the big name signing for Vegas, with the later third rounder, they targeted Trey Zoom from Texas A&M, who was actually announced as a center after having played left tackle for the Aggies. Shows an excellent understanding for angles and how to apply force with purpose in the run game, light out of his stance to take on skip pull assignments or get out to the corner and pin and pull stuff, while recognizing opportunities to peel back on defenders in pursuit. Times up his strike very well and is hyperactive with his hands to re-establish control and pass protection, to go with smooth lateral movements, doesn't provide a ton of oomph on contact in order to create displacement near the point of attack, and long pass rushers are able to give Zoom trouble when they're first to establish meaningful contact, with limited core strength I thought that really give him problems at times in the more extended space for defenders to work one-on-one and build up momentum for the interaction. So I view them as a transition candidate inside myself, where some of those weaknesses can be masked. The Raiders also terminated the contract of veteran offensive lineman Alex Cappa this offseason, so although Zune primarily played left tackle for the Aggies, I'd expect his home to be in the inside, as a swing guy for the three interior spots as a rookie, as the initial plan here, after also signing former 39er Spencer Burford in free agency. Jamal McCoy, the Tennessee corner, Funnily enough, they swapped those 2 first picks on day 3 of Buffalo here in exchange for a 7th rounder next year to make sure they're the ones taking a fairly low risk gamble on what many perceived as a top 10 prospect based on his 2024 tape. Of course, this is a complex situation considering McCoy missed all of last season with a torn ACL and may now require another complicated surgery that could knock him out for a whole nother year. So definitely worrisome, but considering what the Raiders are, and they have no established options at corner at this point, they may strike gold here with how dominant the tape was for this then 19-year-old true sophomore in the SEC. McCoy is a supremely talented outside corner who can really bump and run, where he throws off receivers at the line, and then has the speed to hang stride for stride with just about anyone. In zone coverage, he operates with good eye balance between the quarterback and nearby targets, with impressive fluidity and closing burst for that size. Plus he has some suddenness to elude blockers, and already showed massive improvements staying on his feet as a tackler from 2023 to 24. Although he does get hung up with guys more than he'd like to see, and his coverage style can certainly be described as scrappy at this point, where he'll probably get flagged quite a bit early on until he learns to take his hands off at the breakpoint. But here at the top of day 3, this is a fairly low stakes gamble on a rare talent who could pay off massively down the line, even if he ends up being just a 3-year player for them. He may immediately have the highest ceiling of anybody in the Raiders secondary when he's inserted. Mike Washington Jr. from Arkansas is a big powerful back at 6'2", 225 pounds, who efficiently transitions from horizontal to vertical movement and can plow through bodies around the line of scrimmage. If you give him a chance to really get rolling and unleash that 4.33 speed, to go with how defenders at times bounce off his quads, he's like a locomotive, and he became a more reliable receiver last season, only dropping 1 of 29 catchable passes with long arms to expand his target radius. His vision and how he transfers information when space becomes compromised can be a little spotty, where he stutters his feet in the backfield or becomes over-reliant on bouncing stuff, and he fumbled 7 times over the past 2 seasons on 359 combined touches, where he allows his elbow to get too far off his frame as he deals with the initial tackler and he can be punched up by someone else. Which some people may question why you target a running back as highly regarded talent-wise as Washington when you just picked Ashton Genty 6th overall last year, whose lack of efficiency more so was an indictment on the space provided for him up front rather than the rookie himself. But I believe, along with veteran Raheem Mostert not being back, this was more so based on Washington being one of the most talented players available at that point, and he's a great fit for his one-cut style running scheme. Dalton Johnson, the other Arizona safety, a pick that was made about 2 rounds earlier, in exchange for sending 2023 7th round pick Tyree Wilson to the Saints, who never came close to living up to the hype unfortunately, brings that upfield mindset and the knack for finding entry points as a tackler in the run game, urgently filling from depth. Johnson positioned himself very well as a deep zone defender in accordance to how the pass concept plays out, while displaying good route anticipation and adequate fluidity in his transitions to match up with guys in the slot. Slightly below average in all his measurements, including a fairly narrow frame, needs to tidy up his angles and run support from the high post especially, and not get sucked up as much by play action. And it's cool to see him and Stukes reunite in Vegas, following the time together in that wildcat defense, where they basically swap spot at times in the coverage rotations. While the Raiders certainly needed to add some more safety depth with the departures of Jamal Adams, even if he was more so a linebacker at this stage anyway, Terrell Edmonds and Lonnie Johnson, who all weren't real needle movers anyway, but they also didn't bring anyone into that room from the veteran market, so Johnson has a solid shot at starting multiple games as a rookie, and thus they still add to it. Hezekiah Masters, the Cal corner, played a lot of catch technique, where it correctly identified how receivers wanted to stem their route, initiated contact, and was able to stay in phase vertically, beautifully overlaps in zone coverage, such as getting involved and throws up the seam when playing cover 3, and he's not looking to turn down altercations around the line of scrimmage. His aggressiveness does get him in trouble at times, where his feet can be ahead of his hands when asked to press, and jumping against double moves in off coverage, and he chooses the wrong times to just throw a shoulder, and generally not use his arms as a tackler. The Raiders brought back Eric Stokes, who played a massive 90% of defensive snaps last season for them as a free agent, on a 3-year $30 million contract, but with last year's 3rd rounder Darren Porter still growing, coming off an up and down rookie season, and the McCoy situation, adding some more depth here, and especially a playmaker at the corner position in masses, that makes sense. Malik Benson, the Oregon wide receiver, is a speed demon who flashes as a deep threat, run after catch specialist and punt returner. Already was eating on hitches and speed outs because of the cushion corners provided him, while flashing the skills to expand his route tree. Consistently applies overhand technique, sharply turns up the field, and carries his speed extremely well while curving his path. But he allows his stem to be widened way too easily and ends up drifting on too many of his routes. and unnecessarily leaves his feet or allows passes below the numbers to get close to his frame. Very quiet offseason for Vegas in terms of adding pass catchers for the eventual quarterback of the future, but I do think the free agency signing Jalen Nailor could play a pivotal role, and it opens up opportunities for guys like Benson to at least see the field on offense as a field stretcher, go of immediately competing for punt return duties, where he took one of just 9 chances back to the house last season. And finally, Brandon Cleveland from NC State is just a broadly built D tackle at 6'4", 315 pounds, with denseness throughout his frame and comfort lining up between the guards, comes off the ball low and with some shock in those hands to be firm at the point of attack, and features the tight arm over to free himself from stalemates late in passing situations. But he's not an explosive athlete, with a rather slow first step and arms around 32 inches, and he doesn't have the foot quickness or flexibility to threaten the edges of interior pass protectors so he can actually corner his rush. So pretty much a pure 2-down run stop in shade nose, which they were in need of another body to rotate through. So I thought the Raiders found a real nice balance here of addressing areas of need, but not reaching for lesser players typically, choosing the right mix between more floor and ceiling oriented prospects, with anything from true sophomores basically in McCoy's case, and even 7th year seniors, as long as they were high football character guys. For anyone who watched the Raiders linebackers last season, yes, including Devin White, who some people might still hype up based on raw tackling numbers and really good PR, yet somehow remains unsigned as I'm putting these notes together, and how vulnerable the middle of the field felt for them, you'd expect them to address it at some point in the draft, considering the quality of the class, but they did pair up Nakobe Dean and Quay Walker again, who played very well together at Georgia, and then to varying degrees at their respective first NFL stops. Now at around $77 million combined over the next 3 years, so with a couple of day free selections at the position from the past 2 drafts, who feature quite prominently on special teams, prioritizing the front and back end in terms of draft resources makes sense. Since I used the 2 terms already, the way I see it, what based on level of play they get from Mendoza once he's acclimated in Kubiak's system determines the flow of this draft class altogether, and if they can get the 2024 version of McCoy corner, defines the ceiling of this group. Either way, there's a lot more excitement around this franchise than what we felt when last season ended. And that brings us to team number 32 now, the Los Angeles Chargers, who in round 1, 22nd overall selected Akeem Mesidor, the edge from Miami, 2nd round 63rd overall, Jake Slaughter, interior offensive lineman Florida, a trio of 4th rounders, pick 105 Brennan Thompson, wide receiver Mississippi State, 117 Travis Burke, offensive tackle Memphis, and 131 Genesis Smith, safety Arizona. In the 5th round, pick 145 Nick Barrett, interior defensive lineman South Carolina, and a pair of 6th rounders, pick 202 Logan Taylor, interior offensive lineman Boston College, and 206 Alex Harkey, offensive tackle / interior O-lineman Oregon. Miami's Akeem Mesidor is explosive and violent off the ball, with heavy hands-on contact to set a firm edge, stonewalling kick-out blocks, funneling the ball to his teammates, and actively working off contact to get involved in stops. Last year, he trimmed some weight for a full-time edge role, and learned under an all-time great pass rusher in Jason Taylor as his position coach, who has his ability to stress tackles up the field, but then slice inside on them if the overset really went to a different level. Was often utilized on stunts and loops, where he does an excellent job of timing those up to go around his teammates, and he naturally pairs hand swipes with it as opponents try to redirect for him. His arms being just over 32 inches leads to him getting outreached at times and limits his tackling radius, and only as a 6th-year senior did I feel like he was truly rushing the passer with much of a plan in how he sets up moves throughout games. So I understand why he might fall a little bit as a 25-year-old rookie who has required foot surgeries at both West Virginia and Miami, but Jim Harbaugh and company just focus on how good a football player he's going to be for them for the next 5 years. After not being willing to match the price point of $24 million annually for what basically was a half-year rental in Odafe Owe, despite his best stretch of play coming with LA, and not really addressing edge otherwise, outside of bringing back long-term veteran Khalil Mack for another year, this checks out fine. Jake Slaughter from Florida was announced as a guard, and based on what they've said since, considering they signed Tyler Biadasz, previously with Dallas and then Washington last year, as a direct response to the retirement of veteran Bradley Bozeman, which I think they were ready to move on from him anyway, it looks like this is where they intend on playing him as a rookie, since they also released Mekhi Becton, whose one outlier season with Philly didn't last with the Chargers unfortunately, to go with basically swapping out Zion Johnson for Cole Strange, which based on only having played center through his 3 years with the Gators, I don't love as much, when otherwise this was right in line with where I valued Slaughter, and they did add a late 4th rounder plus a 6th for sliding by 8 spots with the Patriots, Now Onslaughter has excellent snap-to-step quickness with precise hands to latch and sustain run blocks for extended periods, shows the mobility to fold underneath his teammates and connect with bodies on outside zone runs, and peels off combination blocks with excellent timing, while showcasing light feet, excellent agility laterally, and tight hands to go with alert eyes and pass protection. Too often lost defensive linemen to arm over him when it looks like he's in solid position as a run blocker, and if powerful D tackles can gain access to his chest first, even though he works hard to re-anchor, they can definitely create vertical displacement, which leads to him getting over-aggressive trying to jump set shade alignments at times. Which hiring Mike McDaniel as the OC, who majors in wide zone, and asking the lineman to pull out to the corner mesh as well with slotted skill set. And McDaniel also brought along fullback Alec Ingold from Miami, by the way. As Biadish's cap hit goes up over the next 3 years, the dead cap actually continues to decrease, so maybe there's a shift in plans if the rookie's transition isn't quite as smooth as initially thought. But McDaniel's mindset also translated when it came to the speed he added at wide receiver next in Brennan Thompson from Mississippi State, the player whose new OC famously said he'd take his shirt off if the Bolts would draft him. Only 5'9", 170 pounds, with physical press corners with agile feet, can really throw off the timing of his routes, but he's quite slippery off the line to elude contact, and then he has the burners to run by pretty much anyone, with that 4.26 being the top time at this year's combine. He actually spent nearly 90% of snaps out wide over the last 2 years, with an average depth of target of 18.5 yards, while doing well to sort through traffic. Thompson had some impressive moments of plucking passes at full extension over his head, and when he can just grab them on the run, he can destroy pursuit angles. I did have some reasons I was lower on him than consensus. Not the most natural hands, clearly lacks the frame to win consistently for contact, and I certainly wouldn't call him a creative or make you miss type of player after the catch. LA exercised a 50 option on wide receiver Quentin Johnston's rookie contract, but have yet to bring back Keenan Allen, and didn't add anyone from the free agency market. So with the excitement of McDaniels, clearly there's a path to at least use his speed to create space and get him involved on crossers, but I struggle with this type of profile other than maybe as a number 4. Travis Burke, the Memphis offensive tackle, brings an impressive physical profile at 6'9", 325 pounds, with over 35-inch arms and 10-inch hands, while having logged over 1,100 snaps at both tackle spots and shown continuous improvement as he stepped up in level of competition. Brings a mean streak in the run game where he can either widen the edge or snatch up linebackers with authority, and to go with his expanded reach offering more room for error, his core strength and fluidity to recover from compromised positions in pass pro stood out, but too tall and drops his eyes as a run blocker, struggling with his footwork to establish good positioning, where he simply got by based on raw strength a lot, while not really jumping into his pass sets, also catching rushers at this point, and getting super grabby, 30 penalties in 4 years as a starter. And looking ahead to the final selection here, Alex Harkey from Oregon, another beefy right tackle with thick quads and arms, who brings that violent mindset and torque to clear out rushing lanes, displays much more advanced footwork and hand positioning for both zone and gap schemes, and you also see it in his pass sets, where he consistently puts himself in good positions with quality read and response time, but has a bad combination of being tall, yet his arms not reaching 32 inches, which leads to him lunging a bit. I thought he wouldn't be able to survive against NFL speed off the edge into deeper pockets for quarterbacks that like to hold on to the ball, but here with Justin Herbert regularly helping out his O-line with the way he negates rush angles definitely helps. LA allowed Austin Deculus and Foster Sterol to sign near minimum 1-year deals elsewhere, as clearly they weren't the answers for potential new injuries to the starting tackles, who both missed most of the last season, and I can't really take another year of extended action for Trey Pipkins, or even worse, Trevor Penning kicking back out to tackle. So how I see this is that maybe Harkey actually gives you better chance of surviving out of right tackle if all gets banged up again, and keep Herbert upright, while Burke has enough to fix technically, where he can be developed into that true swing tackle, who eventually can jump in on either end, and allow him to put that aggressive run blocking 6th lineman out there a few times per game. Genesis Smith, the third safety for Arizona that we're going to discuss today, has a nose for the ball in how he comes downhill with long arms and agility to sidestep blockers in the run game, roams around in zone coverage with an excellent combination of instinct, eyes, range, and how he times up his arrival at the catch point to separate receivers from the ball. When he's kept over slot receivers from depth, his light feet and how rapidly he closes the gap when he can attack the initial break definitely stands out, but he can get caught opening his hips too far one way as he relates to routes and gets crossed over, while the biggest problem of course are the missed tackles as he gets his momentum too far out in front and relies on dragging guys down. He had a miss rate around 20% all 3 years as a starter, but a true junior with this type of talent, I viewed him as a mid-day 2 type of guy, even if there are certainly things to clean up, and to get him here at the end of the 4th. Considering the Chargers didn't add anyone from the veteran market and kind of settle in with Derwin James primarily lining up at nickel, there's a real path for Smith to compete for a starting job straight away with either Tony Jefferson or Elijah Molden and become a difference maker for them long term. I'll be a lot quicker on these last two. Nick Barrett, the South Carolina D-tackle, presents a wide-packed frame with long arms and big hands to go with the strength to absorb force and work down the line against zone flow, combines quality burst out of his stance with the power to attack the depth of the pocket, and just a brawler who casts a wide net to catch nearby block areas, but very limited playing time, regularly a tad late off the ball and to process the play, very poor change of direction testing, and there's almost no plan rushing the passer at this point. The Chargers allowed Otito Ogbonia and Deshaun Hand to walk in free agency, but did sign Dalvin Tomlinson for a year at just over $6 million, who could allow them to really beef up in the base with 3 down linemen if you had Tyree Tart and last year's 3rd rounder Jamari Caldwell. How much they actually tap into that to completely shut down opposing rushing attacks potentially still needs to be figured out, but outside of Justin Eboigbe, they had very little depth behind it. And finally, Logan Taylor from Boston College has starting experience along every spot of the O-line other than center, gets the job done as a run blocker with quality hand placement, footwork and leg turn, while operating with a flat back, tight elbows, and alert eyes and pass protection. But I thought not having the bend and more so average athleticism would make backside scoops challenging for him in a wide zone system, and it frequently presented soft edges to his frame, but not sliding sufficiently, and ended up hooking rushers as they ripped underneath him. So he's kind of fighting an uphill battle to secure a definite spot on the active roster, although his position flexibility and experience are definitely a plus as they think about who they might elevate on a weekly basis. And after going edge in the 1st round, I thought they also added another very interesting name as a UDFA in Western Michigan's Nadine Tucker, who we can read up more in the piece I already referenced a couple of times if you're interested. Altogether though, I have some questions about this group of names. Not that I dislike any of them individually, even though I have concerns around Brennan Thompson's viability beyond anything than a role player with elite speed. Slaughter to me is at least starting his career out of position. There are no natural guards at least on this list altogether, other than Logan Taylor, pick 202. I love Mesidor, but I don't think they got him at a surplus value at least, considering his age and some health concerns. And overall, I would have definitely preferred a strategy of taking those upside flyers late on day 3. I think Genesis Smith has a chance to be the crown jewel of this class for them and be a needle-moving starter long term. And Travis Burke has a lot of talent to develop into the mold of what John Harbaugh and company want to see from the O-line, but I don't feel that much better about that unit altogether, as most of the offseason additions are supposed to be made already, and the same is true for the 3 wide receiver sets. At least they did sign David Njoku at the start of May to go with Charlie Kohler to make the combination of tight ends feel a little more dynamic. Just a little underwhelming, and I don't know if the defensive talent does that much for me, as Chris O'Leary is facing the tough task of replacing Jesse Minter as the coordinator, which is gonna hurt them as we get to a divisional draft recap. One final time, where at the top I put the team that kicked off the event by securing the quarterback of the future in Fernando Mendoza, the Raiders, and as I already outlined, I just thought a nice balance of positions they addressed, going with different styles of profiles, not discriminate against age, but also targeting a few players that have some things to clean up before they can become contributors, with the selection of Tennessee corner Jamal McCoy at the top of day 3 as a fairly low stakes, extremely high upside bet, getting what on tape was a top 10 prospect in this class. Then I have 2 teams tied for second. First the Chiefs, who actually took the best and cleanest corner, even if all the way up at 6 and moving up a little bit further for him. I don't love that they put themselves in position where they had to address that hole that they created themselves, but in combination with Jaden Kennedy early on day 3, now that young trio they have can be an excellent cost control asset with a young but very talented defense, even if I personally just didn't view the other first rounder Peter Woods as someone I'm willing to bet on in that range. And for as bizarre as the Garrett Nussmeier fall was, if health-wise there's nothing to be concerned about, they got my clear QB3 and potentially a premier backup for peanuts. Broncos are tied with them here, which talking about them third feels wrong considering how glowingly I spoke about multiple of the day 3 selections. Tyler Onydim at the top of round 3 is what pushes them down, even though I certainly understand betting on his skill set in a different environment, and I'm in no way betting against what the mad scientist Vance Joseph can do with him along the D-line. Love Jonah Coleman, who may be the lead back in a committee by 2027 or earlier even if the veteran starter gets banged up again, and I like all 3 of the 7th rounders as rotational quality players. And the Chargers unfortunately are the blast for me, as I just described, basically having a full slate of picks, if you consider 3 4th rounders is equal to a 3 plus a 4. And I don't feel drastically better about your O-line or wide receiver room right now than last year, which truly created an uphill battle for the quarterback who played like a superhero at times. That's just a bit of a downer for me. Especially when you go wide receiver at the top of day 3, but you target a 170 pounder. As much as I like Akeem Mesidor as a pro-ready third play on the edge, and potentially finding a starting safety in round 4 at some point in his rookie year. But hey, this is going to be a really fun division to watch, now that the powers have somewhat shifted, yet the Chiefs are out for blood again. And this puts a close on the divisional draft and roster review series. Thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed this video, or any of the other episodes, please hit that like button for me and the bell for more content from me. If this was your first time listening, make sure to check out all the other divisions if you like. I really don't think you're going to find more compactly presented info on all these players coming to the NFL, roster constructions for every team, and a feel for where they are currently. I'll be back next week with an article that kind of puts a wrap on everything draft related, with more of a big picture on the most improved position groups across the NFL. After that, I may have something on biggest remaining questions for each team. I'll have my annual breakout candidates coming out. I'm probably doing my own version of the NFL Top 100 again, but I'm open to some off-season content ideas, so please drop those in the comments, along with thoughts on anything discussed today. Hoping to hear from you guys soon. So until then, see you later. Peace!